Hi, I'm Brett Story. I'm a nonfiction filmmaker and sometimes geographer, and I'm happy to be here at the IU Cinema. Good cinema, my best cinematic experiences are experiences in which, there's a collision between feeling and thinking. It's activating my mind in a certain way, but it's also a sensory experience. Like the sound is operating on my body on a whole other register than maybe the thoughts that are coming to my mind. I'm having an emotional experience that's not just in service of a plot or a theme, but is, actively conjuring my own memories, my own life experiences, and bringing them into dialogue with what I'm being asked to think about in a film. And so there's something about how cinema is already a sensorial experience at a bunch of different kinds of levels that can be intellectually and emotionally and psychologically and sensorially activating and challenging all at once. And then I really do believe that cinema is powerful because it makes space. It's durational, and at its best, it's a communal experience. To be together with others, to feel like a space is made out of the film being projected, to experience ourselves as belonging to some sort of shared world vis-a-vis a film is an incredibly important part of the capacity of cinema, and something that I relish. I mean, I watch films in movie theaters more than I watch them at home for that reason, because I want to belong and be entangled with other people. I like to hear what people laugh at and sigh at, and I want to look at people's faces as we're all walking out and imagine the sort of different ways in which we've all just related to this shared object together as well as separately. I make films in part anyways, because I fell in love with the actual practice of it, what the act of making a film occasions, the kinds of experiences, adventures, encounters, forms of just paying attention to the world. That for me as a sort of practice, as a thing to spend time doing, I've always found totally thrilling, and enables me to sort of extract the kinds of preoccupations and obsessions and ideas and questions and pains that can sometimes just feel trapped inside of me, and sort of pull them out and give them a project, a vehicle to be mobilized through. So I make films. I mean, there's something actually liberating about admitting that I make films in part for myself, because I also do make films for whoever will find them. I mean, there is such an important pleasure and privilege to realizing that I've made something that someone else has seen, has thought about, has talked about with their friends. I mean, the idea that something I've made has awakened something in someone else's imagination. And for me, that means I don't have to make films for a lot of people. I mean, again, when I think about the albums that have gotten me through really hard moments in my life, or collections of poetry that have made me feel less alone in the world, they weren't necessarily popular mainstream works of art, but I found them somehow, often accidentally. I stumbled upon them. Some special friend would introduce me to them, and the sort of act of just feeling like I was encountering a stranger that was speaking to an experience that made me feel less alone has always been such a profound and important experience for me. So I make films for whoever feels like they need that film, and or anyone who feels like they are alone in their inability to understand something, or alone in their preoccupation with an experience, and then have found their way to feeling like they're less alone through something that I've made. I'm a documentary filmmaker essentially because I'm a person who likes flea markets and puzzles. I like to go to a big desk of junk and look for and find the treasures. I like to look at a a massive puzzle and find the patterns and the pieces and make kismet and magic out of those. And that's what editing is. I mean, editing is like the vocabulary of the edit is to like take delight in what can be produced in the juxtaposition of disparate elements. And I love it. I mean, so much so that at this point in my career, I'm sort of like, maybe I'm going to take a break from any kind of production whatsoever and just work entirely on archival films. And maybe not. I mean, I love production as well, because production is about having this excuse for encounters that you don't normally have. I mean, I'm a shy person. I don't go about my daily life having conversations with strangers, but I do that when I'm making a film. And there's something about having this pretext, you know, I'm making a film, it's about this subject, will you talk to me, that opens up a space for the kinds of conversations and entanglements that, you know, that are just so full of surprises and like wild experiences that it's hard not to treasure that and delight in it. But yeah, I think it's really the editing process and the sort of idea of like even the experiment, the magical experiment of like deciding that there's a film in something when you have no guarantees that there's a film there. At least with a puzzle, you know that there was a manufacturer who at one point had a full picture that they turned into 1,000 pieces. With a film, you can have 1,000 pieces and no promise or blueprint that there's going to be a film. And so there's a kind of like magical gambit that one embarks on when they says, I'm going to do it. I'm going to find a film in this material, and I find it really, really thrilling, and especially in the ways that it sort of makes the brain start to pop, you know, and dream out loud with the images. I come to film really out of a love for music and a love for literature more so than any kind of cinephilia. I feel like I'm still catching up to the history of film in many ways. But I was, from a really young age, especially as a teenager and in my 20s, a person who went to see shows all the time, was embedded in a punk rock scene and an indie rock scene. I spent my 20s in Montreal, which had this amazing, thriving music scene. All of my friends were in bands, and I was that one person who loved music but couldn't sing, couldn't play an instrument. And I think that I really came to film out of a desire to be doing something similar to what all my friends in like really amazing post-punk and indie rock bands were doing, which is working collaboratively, playing shows for their friends, making weird art. And I was also always a reader. So I wrote poetry. I read a lot of poetry, Michael Ondaatje, Wallace Shawn, Anne Carson. And I would say those were my influences really more than filmmakers. And even now I think about film as a multimedia kind of medium. I spend a lot of time thinking about images as a form of music, as having pace, you know, rhythm and pacing and beat, and operating in this kind of visceral way on the body, and also thinking about the edit as you know, very similarly to how I would read and appreciate poetry. Like what happens to the language when you break it down and reassemble it in these forms that are simultaneously strange and also so exact as to finally puncture the indescribability of experience. So I still really find a lot of influence in music and musicians and writers that I love. I'm self-educated as a filmmaker, and I've had sort of different rounds of education. I feel like there was learning how to make films itself, and then there was learning about the film industry, and then there was unlearning the film industry. So, you know, the advice I have really has to do with a way of paying attention to your own interests and finding the voices, the right voices to let in as you're establishing your craft and and coming to terms with why you want to be doing what you're doing. I think that my own experience in the film industry, especially when I made my first film, was encountering a lot of skepticism about my work, and I was young and insecure, and of course, like many people, I let those voices in, and I thought, this person doesn't think what I'm doing is interesting. They are looking at me like it's a bad idea, a dumb idea, too arty, too intellectual, too slow, whatever it is. And that sort of doubt on what I was doing caused a lot of confusion for me, and self-consciousness. And so I think that sometimes what you want to do is, as a filmmaker, is just understand who already speaks your language, who's best positioned to understand why you are doing what you're doing, and those can be the voices that offer perspective, because one does need perspective. You can't just be motivated out of self-belief and self-confidence in the world. That also occasions maybe a certain kind of problematic arrogance or entitlement. So you want to have interlocutors that you trust, but just know that the industry isn't necessarily the space in which to find or to listen too much to whose thoughts on your work count. Stay curious. Don't try and game the system. Don't try and produce work that you think is what other people want. You can't figure that out. The marketplace is manic and hostile and fickle. And if you genuinely want to make work that has something to say to anyone else, then your best anchor for that is your own curiosity. What are you not just interested in saying, but what are you interested in understanding that you don't already know? That's a way of positioning yourself to be genuinely engaged and attentive to the world. And I think that's always what makes for work that has any kind of depth.
We are Amazon workers.
We have to match Amazon's intensity and power in several different ways, not just traditionally.
We did not have a television in my household, and I grew up in a town of 1,000 people on an island that was 2 hours away from the nearest Cineplex, which I didn't get to go to until I was 16 and could drive the car, and then we would drive 2 hours to go to the mall to watch films. So for me, I've discovered film as a college student. That's where I first encountered cinema. I mean, like I said, I was able to listen to music and care about music and zines and literature, but an art house cinema is a space, especially on a campus, because college life and one's sort of early 20s is such a formative period in one's development as an adult. And it might be the only time in one's life when they can encounter work that doesn't have mainstream distribution, right? We live in I'm not seeing beautiful experimental political films on Netflix or on my phone. I'm seeing them in an art house cinema, and I'm seeing them with other people. Someone has brought them there, someone who cares, someone who's done the research, has curated something, has made it an event, and that event might happen one time only. And to be there and to share that experience that you might never have again with other people who you can then go out, hopefully, and have dinner with or have drinks with and talk about it. I mean, that's just extremely essential to any kind of true experience with what film can be, I think. So yes, now I play my films in art house cinemas on campuses and off campuses, and they're always the best screenings. And I learn about what other films have been programmed there, and I imagine myself in dialogue with those films and those filmmakers, and it makes all the work more than it already is.